There is a color that does not simply decorate your walls. It whispers into your destiny. There is a shade that, according to ancient spiritual laws, can silently drain prosperity, disturb peace, and suffocate the flow of abundance in a home without anyone noticing. And today, you are about to understand why the greatest mistake is not using the wrong prayer, but surrounding your life with the wrong spiritual frequency. Before this revelation unfolds, I invite you to support this sacred space. Subscribe now to the Jewish Wisdom channel. Your subscription is not just a click, it is a partnership in spreading ancient light in a modern world. Now, write this phrase in the comments as a declaration over your home and your future. My house is aligned with divine abundance. There are truths that were never hidden, only ignored. The ancient sages taught that nothing in the world is neutral. Every object carries intention. Every sound releases influence. Every color vibrates with an invisible spiritual force. To the modern eye, a color is merely aesthetic. To the wisdom of the Torah, color is a vessel of spiritual energy. The book of Proverbs says that the soul of a person is the lamp of the Creator. That means light itself is not symbolic. It is functional. It acts, it moves, it builds, and it can also block. What most people never realize is that prosperity is not born in bank accounts. It is born in alignment. An alignment begins in places so ordinary that the spiritual world hides its greatest power there. Inside the walls of your own home, you arrange furniture with care. You choose fragrances. You select textures. But no one ever taught you that color is not just visible. It speaks in the language of heaven. The ancient Hebrews did not choose colors randomly. The garments of the priests were defined by divine instruction. The curtains of the tabernacle were not aesthetic choices. They were coded layers of spiritual function. Blue for divine revelation, white for purification, gold for divine authority. Every color had a frequency. Every frequency opened or closed a gate. And so, across centuries, something dangerous slowly happened. People stopped asking what a color does, and only asked how it looks. This is how a spiritual weapon disguised as decoration entered homes across the world. A color that appears sophisticated. A color associated with luxury. A color that modern culture celebrates as power, elegance, and authority. But that, in ancient spiritual understanding, corresponds to constriction, heaviness, and spiritual blockage. It looks rich, but it drains richness. It looks strong, but it suffocates flow. It looks safe, but it feeds stagnation. And the most shocking part is this. This color is more common inside homes today than any other symbol of abundance. People paint their walls with it. They place it in their bedrooms. They surround their dining tables with it. They sit inside it for hours and wonder why money struggles, relationships feel heavy, and motivation collapses without explanation. This teaching is not superstition. It is spiritual physics. The Kabbalistic masters taught that prosperity flows through what they called the channels of expansion. And everything that contracts the soul also contracts provision in the physical world. When the atmosphere of a place becomes spiritually dense, movement becomes hard. Decisions feel heavy. Opportunities lose clarity. And slowly, without noise, without crisis, without scandal, the flow of wealth dries up. Most people think curses come through words, but many blockages come through environments. You can pray inside a closed frequency and never feel why prayers echo without returning. You can work inside a suffocating spiritual tone and never understand why effort yields little fruit. And you can surround your life with a vibration that pushes abundance away, simply because no one ever taught you that color is not innocent. What you are about to learn next is not speculation and not cultural belief. It is rooted in the blueprint of creation itself. In the next revelation, the ancient texts will expose which color was always associated with spiritual constriction, judgment, and limitation, and why bringing it into your home is spiritually equivalent to dimming the lamp of your own destiny. Underscore in the ancient language of creation, nothing is accidental. Every shape carries intention. Every sound carries movement. And every color carries a spiritual command. What modern eyes see as design, the ancient world understood as decree. This is why the Torah does not describe colors lightly. When color appears in sacred text, it appears as law. The color that must now be revealed is not forbidden by superstition, nor rejected by fear. It is restricted by design. It is the color that the ancient masters associated with constriction, severity, and the tightening of spiritual flow. That color is deep, absolute black, not the absence of light in a poetic sense, but the full spiritual symbol of absorption without reflection. Kabbalah teaches that black does not transmit light, It absorbs it, it receives and does not return. It holds and does not release. And abundance only flows where light moves. In the spiritual anatomy of the universe, prosperity is movement. Blessing is circulation. Increase is expansion. Wherever energy becomes trapped, stagnation is born. And wherever stagnation persists, lack eventually manifests. This is why in the Holy Temple, black was never used in sacred service. The garments of the priests were white, blue, purple, and gold, but never black. White for purification, blue for divine connection, gold for authority, purple for covenant. These were colors of transmission, not absorption. The Torah speaks of darkness, but darkness is never the goal. Darkness always appears as a stage that must be transformed by light. When God said, "Let there be light," he did not negotiate with the darkness. He replaced it with movement, with revelation, with separation between confinement and freedom. Kabbalah reveals that light enters the world in measured streams. These streams require vessels to carry them. When the vessel is open, the light flows. When the vessel is sealed, the light backs up. Black, in its spiritual meaning, represents a sealed vessel, a container that closes itself to outward flow. This is why the sages taught that environments saturated in spiritually absorptive vibrations slowly suffocate the channels of blessing. Not because the color itself is evil, but because it carries the energy of withholding, judgment without mercy, strength without movement, containment without release. Now understand this with clarity. Wealth in the spiritual world is not stored, it is streamed. Abundance does not sit, it moves, it circulates. It multiplies by passing through. And anything that interrupts circulation eventually interrupts supply. This is why many people feel that something invisible presses against their progress. They work, but the reward feels smaller than the effort. They plan, but momentum dies halfway. They dream, but execution feels unusually heavy. There is no open rebellion, no dramatic collapse, only quiet resistance. And they never suspect the environment. The ancient rabbis taught that a person is formed by what surrounds them, as much as by what they choose. The walls teach, the floor absorbs, the ceiling listens. The air itself becomes a participant in destiny. When black dominates the environment, the soul receives a non-stop message of containment. The nervous system receives a constant signal of compression. The spirit feels strength without flow, authority without softness, stability without expansion. This creates a spiritual paradox. The person feels protected, but not productive, guarded, but not growing, stable, but not increasing. And prosperity cannot live where expansion is discouraged. This is why the Kabbalistic understanding of color is never aesthetic. It is energetic. The Zohar describes color as spiritual clothing for invisible forces. What you clothe your space with will determine what kind of forces are allowed to move freely there. Black, when used sparingly and with intention, can serve a role of grounding, seriousness, boundary. But when it becomes dominant, when it rules walls, furniture, and atmosphere, it becomes a spiritual command of limitation, not punishment, not curse, limitation. And limitation always weakens prosperity, because wealth requires openness to receive, to exchange, to multiply. This is why the ancient warning was never screamed. It was whispered, not because the danger was small, but because those who understand spiritual law do not operate by panic. They operate by precision. Now, connect this to the words of Yeshua, when he said that the eye is the lamp of the body. If the eye is full of darkness, how great is that darkness? This was not only a moral statement, it was an environmental key. What you allow your perception to dwell on becomes the internal atmosphere of your life. If the environment constantly feeds a frequency of contraction, the inner world will begin to echo that frequency without effort. This is why homes dominated by black often feel heavy without explanation, why conversations become sharper, why patience becomes thinner, why generosity feels harder, why even rest feels restless. The soul is not reacting to style, it is responding to signal. And now something even deeper must be understood. The wealth of a person is not decided by God each morning. It is shaped by alignment with laws that do not change. Light flows where light is welcomed. Expansion manifests where expansion is honored. Movement increases where movement is invited. Environments that symbolically reject reflection slowly reject reception. And this principle is older than money. It began with light. What most people never realized is that in the beginning, the first poverty was not financial. It was spiritual. Separation from flow. Constriction of access. Limitation of movement. Prosperity, in Torah language, is not defined as having much. It is defined as moving freely within what you are given. This is why some people with little live in peace, and others with much live in anxiety. The channel is not defined by amount. It is defined by openness. And black, when misused, trains the soul in closure. Closure of hope. Closure of flexibility. Closure of softness. Closure of surrender. This is why the ancient masters never said, do not use black. They said, do not let black rule your space. Because whatever rules your space will slowly rule your perspective. And whatever rules your perspective will eventually rule your decisions. And whatever rules your decisions will quietly rule your outcomes. This is not about fear. This is about spiritual architecture. Now you understand what the color is. The next truth you must receive is even more powerful. Because once alignment is broken, it can also be restored. Once flow is restricted, it can also be reopened. Once a gate is closed, it can also be unlocked. Understanding a law is not enough. Ancient wisdom teaches that knowledge that is not applied becomes weight instead of wings. Revelation that stays only in the mind becomes pressure instead of liberation. What changes destiny is not what you know, but what you align. Now that the spiritual principle is clear, the most important shift begins. The translation of ancient law into daily life. Because the moment awareness enters the home, the environment begins to respond. You do not need to fear your walls. You do not need to panic over objects. You do not need to reject everything that is dark. What you need is not removal driven by fear, but balance guided by wisdom. The problem is not the presence of black. The problem is dominance. Kabbalah teaches that every force in creation must be paired with its opposite for harmony to exist. Judgment must be partnered with mercy. Strength must be partnered with softness. Structure must be partnered with flow. When only one force rules, distortion is born. So the first practical key is not to erase contrast, but to restore movement. If black dominates your home, you do not need to tear it apart. You need to interrupt its rule. Movement begins with light. Light is not only illumination, it is invitation. It tells the unseen world where to enter. This is why the simplest and most powerful shift you can make is the intentional reintroduction of brightness. Open windows. Invite natural light. Allow sunlight to touch surfaces that have been absorbing shadow. Even 5 minutes of direct light changes the spiritual chemistry of a space. The ancient teachers taught that light activates memory and matter. It reminds the environment what it was created to do. Receive and then release. Then comes color as a partner of light, not as decoration, but as testimony. Soft whites invite purification. Earth tones invite stability with movement. Gentle blues invite trust and flow. Warm golds invite provision. None of these dominate. They collaborate. The second key is intentional placement. Never allow absorptive tones to dominate areas where life is exchanged. Dining spaces must breathe openness. Entryways must speak welcome. Bedrooms must communicate rest, not confinement. Workspaces must carry movement, not pressure. Where people gather, energy multiplies. Where energy multiplies, the environment must circulate, not compress. Then comes one of the most underestimated forces in spiritual architecture: sound. Energy that stagnates in silence becomes heavy. This is why in Jewish tradition, sound is always tied to transformation. The shofar moves air, the psalms move emotion. Prayer moves dimensions. Soft, spiritual sound, even quietly playing, reintroduces vibration into spaces where absorption has ruled for too long. It reminds walls that they are not prisons, they are vessels. Now there is something even more practical, and even more confronting. Your words complete what your environment begins. You can replace colors and still block flow with speech. You can brighten walls and still darken atmosphere with complaint. The home responds not only to what it sees, but to what it hears consistently. This is why homes saturated with harsh words feel heavy, even if they are visually bright. And this is why homes filled with gratitude feel light even if they are simple and small. The tongue, according to the ancient texts, is a gate. What passes through it trains the environment in either constriction or circulation. If your speech constantly reinforces lack, struggle, fear, and stress, you rebuild spiritual closure every day without touching a wall. Alignment is not cosmetic, it is atmospheric. This is why the practice of spoken blessing is not symbolic, it is architectural. It literally reshapes the spiritual geometry of a space. Now pause and write this new declaration in the comments. Not as a ritual, but as an act of alignment. My home is a vessel for light, flow, and increase. This sentence is not for the algorithm. It is for your own alignment. Because every word you release teaches your environment what kind of future it is allowed to host. And here is a truth that many people resist at first. Prosperity follows emotional permission before it follows opportunity. If a person internally feels unworthy of ease, expansion will feel unsafe. If a person believes that struggle is their identity, peace will feel unfamiliar. The environment reflects these internal contracts silently. This is why some people feel uncomfortable in bright spaces. Not because of light, but because the nervous system learned to survive in shadow. Restoring flow is not only an architectural act, it is a psychological and spiritual reconciliation. Your nervous system learns expansion again. Your breathing softens. Your decisions loosen. Your generosity returns. Your patience grows. Your creativity awakens without force. These are not mystical fantasies. These are physiological responses to environments that finally support movement instead of pressure. And something else must be restored with equal importance: intentional order. Kabbalah teaches that chaos blocks channels, not because it is messy, but because it confuses direction. Energy that does not know where to go eventually collapses. This is why order in the home multiplies peace without explanation. It gives energy a path. It tells abundance where to land. You do not need perfection. You need direction. Even small moments of intentional order create spiritual corridors through which blessing travels. Now something even more subtle must be addressed. Many people hold on to heaviness because they confuse seriousness with depth. They believe that suffering makes them wise. They believe that pressure makes them spiritual. But ancient wisdom teaches the opposite. Light is not childish. Joy is not shallow. Ease is not profanity. Flow is not irresponsibility. The soul was designed for movement, not survival mode. And survival mode is the natural state of environments that constantly compress. Once flow returns, destiny begins to loosen. You begin to notice time differently. You feel less rushed. You feel less suffocated. You stop gripping control as hard. You start trusting without forcing. This is where prosperity begins to re-enter quietly. Not with a miracle, not with a lottery, not with a dramatic breakthrough, but with restored movement. Movement in thought, movement in relationships, movement in opportunity, movement in courage, movement in action. And prosperity always follows movement. In the next movement of this revelation, something deeply human will be touched. Because spiritual law does not only shape walls, it shapes wounds, memories, emotions, and inherited fears. You will see how environments of constriction are often built from stories of loss, poverty, and protection passed down through generations. And how restoring flow is not only redesigning a space, it is healing a lineage. There was a woman who did not believe any of this at first. She had no interest in mysticism, no patience for symbolism, no appetite for hidden meanings. Her life had taught her to trust only what she could touch, count, and control. She worked hard. She survived storms. She carried responsibility like armor. But abundance had never stayed long in her life. Money passed through her hands like water through fingers. Peace visited, but never stayed. Rest came, but never lasted. Her home reflected her inner world without her realizing it. Heavy tones, dark walls, thick curtains, almost no light during the day. Everything chosen for protection, nothing chosen for flow. One winter afternoon, exhausted in ways sleep could not fix, she sat alone on the floor of her living room. The heater hummed, the walls absorbed sound, the air felt thick, and she whispered a sentence she had never allowed herself to say out loud before. "I am tired of surviving." That moment did not feel spiritual. It felt human. A few days later, through a conversation she barely remembers, she heard for the first time that environments do not only host people, they educate them. That walls train the nervous system. That colors negotiates with the subconscious. That homes can either teach a soul to squeeze, or teach it to expand. Out of curiosity more than belief, she made one small change. She opened the curtains fully for the first time in years. The light shocked her. Not because it was bright, but because it felt unfamiliar. That alone told her something was wrong. Then she painted one small wall in a soft, warm tone. Nothing dramatic, just enough to feel contrast. And something quiet shifted. Conversations felt less sharp. Silence felt less heavy. Her body felt slightly less armored. Weeks passed. Opportunities did not fall from the sky. But her reactions changed. She applied for things she once avoided. She spoke with clarity instead of fear. She rested without guilt. And slowly, outcomes followed behavior. not because the wall was magical, but because expansion had returned to her nervous system. This is how spiritual law works. It does not hypnotize reality. It realigns perception, and perception reprograms behavior, and behavior reshapes consequence. This is why environments of constriction feel emotionally familiar to people raised in lack. Poverty teaches the body to contract. Loss teaches the spirit to hide. Trauma teaches the nervous system to choose safety over movement. Lack becomes protection. Darkness becomes camouflage. Compression becomes identity. And the tragedy is this: many people believe they are honoring their story by staying closed, when in fact they are continuing the wound. Flow does not betray survival, it completes it. Now this revelation becomes deeply personal. Some of you listening to this right now live in homes that were designed from fear, not from vision. You chose what felt safe, not what felt alive. You built walls against loss, not doors toward possibility. And you may not even remember when you made that choice. It did not come from vanity. It came from pain. And this is why the message is gentle, not condemning. There is no guilt in protection, but there is healing in expansion. And this is where faith is no longer a concept. It becomes a movement. Faith is not only what you pray, it is what you prepare for. It is not only what you ask God to do, it is what you allow yourself to receive. Some people pray for abundance, while their environment rehearses scarcity every day. Some ask for peace, while their walls rehearse pressure. Some call for new seasons, while their homes declare old wounds. Now pause for a moment and let this question touch you without resistance. Does my home reflect trust or defense? Write this response in the comments if it resonates with you. Not for exposure, but for alignment. I choose movement over fear, because this choice is not decorative, it is prophetic. When you choose movement, you choose growth, even when it feels unfamiliar. You choose circulation, even when stagnation once felt safe. You choose openness, even when your history rewarded closure. This is where destiny begins to bend. Not violently, quietly, gradually, but permanently. Faith is not proven by noise. It is proven by what changes when no one is watching. When you organize without anxiety, when you speak without bitterness, when you rest without guilt, when you receive without apology. All of this is prosperity before money ever arrives. And now there is something important you must understand with honesty. This teaching is not about paint. It is about permission. Permission to live without clutching. Permission to move without fear. Permission to grow without believing you will lose everything if you do. This is what the Torah means when it teaches that God delights in the prosperity of his servant. Not in the numbers, but in the freedom. You were not created to manage survival forever. You were created to participate in flow. And flow is not reckless. It is aligned. It is ordered. It is intentional. It is reverent. It is powerful. If this message is touching something deep inside you, if it is awakening questions you never allowed yourself to ask, if it is softening a place in your soul that learned to harden for too long, then I invite you into something more. If you want to go deeper into these teachings, ask for the Jewish Wisdom eBook in the comments. This material was created to guide you beyond inspiration into practice, not as a theory, as a path, as a living rhythm between ancient wisdom and modern life, a tool for realignment, not fantasy. Because revelation without application fades, but revelation that becomes habit reshapes destiny. And now receive this final seal over your spirit, your home, and your future. You were not created to live sealed. You were created to carry light. And light always finds a way to move. Everything that was revealed until this moment was not given to impress your mind, but to quietly reposition the way you see your life, your home, your future, and yourself. Spiritual wisdom that only sparks curiosity becomes entertainment and fades. But wisdom that restructures behavior becomes a foundation that continues to work even when the words are no longer being spoken. You were never truly listening to a message about color. You were listening to a message about permission. Permission to stop living permanently in defense mode. Permission to stop organizing your life only around protection. Permission to accept that expansion is not dangerous. Permission to understand that light is not a threat to stability, but the very source of increase. Most people unconsciously spend their entire lives guarding the trauma of yesterday instead of preparing the ground of tomorrow. They decorate their homes to survive what already passed. They organize their routines to avoid pain. They protect their money out of fear, and they restrain their dreams out of caution. And after years of doing this, they call it maturity. But ancient wisdom calls it spiritual contraction. True maturity is not learning how to close more efficiently. True maturity is learning how to open without losing discernment. Now you understand something that few people are ever taught. Abundance does not flow toward tension. It flows toward invitation. That invitation begins inside the soul, manifests in the environment, and later reveals itself in movement, opportunity, favor, provision, peace, and clarity. Many people wonder why life feels stuck even when they believe they are doing everything right. They work hard, they pray, they try to be good, they avoid conflict, they avoid scandal. And yet something does not seem to move. This happens because life does not respond only to effort. It responds to alignment. Effort without alignment produces exhaustion. Prayer without alignment produces frustration. Discipline without alignment produces rigidity. But when alignment enters, things begin to move with less force and more favor. This is why the Torah does not teach that God blesses chaos or struggle for its own sake. It teaches that God blesses order. And order is not perfection. Order is direction. Direction of thought, direction of speech, direction of environment, direction of intention. And when these begin to point in the same direction, destiny slowly loosens its grip on resistance. Some of you listening to this are not lacking money. You are lacking permission. Permission to rest without guilt. Permission to receive without suspicion. Permission to be supported without feeling weak. Permission to expand without fearing that everything will be lost again. This is why money feels heavy in your hands. This is why success feels foreign. This is why peace sometimes feels uncomfortable. Your nervous system learned tension as safety, and now ease feels unfamiliar. But God is inviting you into a new internal language, one where trust replaces vigilance, and flow replaces constant control. This transition is not instant. It is learned. It is rehearsed. It is practiced. It is installed slowly through daily awareness, through the way you speak, through the way you organize your space, through the way you allow yourself to rest, through the way you relate to opportunity. This is why teachings like these cannot be consumed casually. They must be walked. They must be lived. They must be allowed to enter habits, not just thoughts. And because many of you feel this shift beginning inside you, because many of you want to go deeper into how ancient Jewish wisdom can be applied to real daily life without superstition, without fear, without confusion, a resource was created specifically to accompany this journey. The Jewish Wisdom eBook was designed as a continuation of everything you received here, not as theory, not as religious instruction, but as a practical spiritual guide to alignment. Inside it, you will find teachings drawn from ancient Jewish wisdom explained in accessible language, showing how spiritual laws influence emotions, environments, decisions, relationships, and provision. It is not centered on rituals, but on rhythm. A rhythm of awareness, a rhythm of alignment, a rhythm of light, a rhythm of flow. If this message resonated with you, if it touched a place inside you where your soul recognizes truth, if it created both discomfort and hope at the same time, that is often the sign that alignment is beginning. To access the Jewish Wisdom eBook, the link is waiting for you in the description of this video and also in the first pinned comment. There is no pressure, no manipulation, only an invitation to stop living only in reaction and start living in alignment. Because alignment does not shout, it stabilizes. It does not rush. It organizes. It does not dramatize. It matures. Now receive this final truth not as poetry, but as direction for your life. You will never create abundance by fighting darkness endlessly. You will create abundance by learning how to carry light consistently, not aggressively, not arrogantly, not recklessly, but faithfully. Light that is consistent replaces darkness without conflict. Flow that is consistent dissolves stagnation without violence. Peace that is consistent dissolves fear without argument. You were not created to live sealed. You were not created to live confined. You were not created to live compressed by your past. You were created to expand in alignment, in rhythm, and in trust. And when your life begins to move again with that rhythm, you will realize that what once felt heavy now feels spacious. What once felt tight now feels fluid. And what once felt impossible now simply feels like the next step. The door was never locked. It was waiting for movement. Now the light knows where to enter, and the rest will follow.